not in the chat today.
All right, I'll pop into it.
For lack of hands.
Yes, understood. And we are live.
Say hi, Weston.
Hi, Weston.
Not you, him.
In 21 years, Weston, you'll get to try this.
Okay. All right. I think I'm all set. Are you all set? Does anybody have any other questions or anything?
I think I am good. Hi, Jeff McKinney.
All right. Let's do it. Jeff, do you have your gin?
It's all you. I do have my gin. Yeah. Looking forward to that.
All right. Let's get the show going. Here we go.
This is Laura Stahlhaus, and you listen to We Like Drinking podcast, where you never drink alone.
At the sound of the tone, the official We Like Drinking time will be 5 o'clock. Commence consumption.
One, two, three, go!
This week on episode 262 of the We Like Drinking podcast, we'll be discussing lightning fines, and we're talking about a new riff on an old tradition with Mollie Lewis. So crack open your beers, uncork that wine, and let's get drinking! Oh, listeners, you're in for a treat this week. We've got bourbon. We've got gin. It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon for some of us. There's babies. It's gonna be a hell.
Yeah. all the babies are the Vikings fans. Where?
May I interject that I think sometimes drinking leads to babies, so it's a very natural pairing.
This is true. We may need to rethink our show. I don't need any more of that.
I do have 3 sons. They're Jim, Jack, and Jose.
and most of them have come since you started this show. So yeah,
this is true. 2/3.
So cheers, my podcast drinking friends, and welcome to Happy Hour 262 of your favorite award-winning topical beer and wine and spirits education podcast focusing on fun, which we are going to be having a lot of this week. So if by now you realize that you are listening to Podcast Cold, be sure to get yourself subscribed to the show by visiting welikedrinking.com/subscribe. All right, as I said, we've got a lot to talk about, and honestly, we've got a lot to drink. So let's find out who we're drinking with and find out what we've got. We're joined by our usual panel members. We have our California Sustainable Wine Growing Ambassador and recovering wine blogger, Jeff Solomon.
Yeah, the only person on the show who'll be drinking with no hands today. No hands.
You've got a straw.
We have our commercial brewer and snake wrangler, John Ruyak.
I am here with well, you know me. I've got a couple in hand.
Perfect. And I am your host and certified specialist of wine, Jeff Eccles. Now, our guest tonight is the sales director for New Riff Distilling, a distillery founded in 2014 by her father, Ken Lewis. She studied wine at the Culinary Institute of America in Napa before moving to San Francisco, where she worked throughout the industry with roles from sommelier to distributor. She also worked in Italy as an export manager for 7 years before returning to Kentucky to join New Riff in their launch. Please help us welcome Mollie Lewis. Welcome to the show, Mollie.
Thank you. Thank you. What a nice welcome.
So excited.
I'm also double fisting, just like John. I've got my 2 bottles here today.
Excellent. We are ready to go. So yeah, let's find out which ones do you have there, Mollie?
Well, they're actually not open, but I'm going to open them in a minute. I have a bourbon. This is from our batch 1. It's signed by Ken Lewis.
Oh, wow.
Our founder. So this is kind of a cool bottle. And then I'm bragging and showing off something that is probably not available to anybody listening to this podcast at the time. However, there will be another release of it. This is our Balboa rye.
Nice.
Heirloom variety rye. This is grown by our corn farmer, and it's very cool.
Excellent. That sounds
Wow.
delicious. Let's see. Jeff's hands are full. So, John, what are you drinking?
I got a bottle of the rye, not the Balboa, but the rye, and I've got some straight up, and then I made a highball as well.
Awesome.
Nice. And Jeff, I'm really fascinated by what you're drinking. So what do you have there? Did we lose Jeff? We may have lost Jeff. So I'm going to go with what I've got. I am going with the Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, also obviously New Riff. And I am just drinking this. I put it over a couple ice cubes, which have already melted. So I am ready to get into this. You can find more about New Riff Distilling at newriffdistilling.com. On Twitter and Instagram, you can find their handle at New Riff, or on Facebook at New Riff Distilling, and also on LinkedIn at New Riff Distilling. Jeff, do we have you back?
Yeah, I think so. Stuff went down, man. Baby stuff. I don't know. So yeah. Oh, hey, buddy. Don't cry through this. Oh, no, you don't get to cry through this. Don't cry. We got the New Riff Kentucky Wild Gin that is a bourbon barrel aged. So I'm super stoked on this. 47%, 12 proprietary herbs and spices as well. So
I'm so glad you have that. That's super cool.
Yeah,
I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
So, John, have you gotten a chance to get into yours yet?
I was a little worried about the delivery of the bottle because, we're supposed to sign for stuff here in New Mexico. And it went to my house rather than to work. But my wife sent me a picture and I'm like, ooh, might I say, these are really sharp bottles. Holy cow. And I got straight home from work that day from the brewery, popped it open and just had a little. Oh, you know what? It tastes just as good as it did the other day when it came by UPS. And I love the caramel notes on this rye. It's nuts. You think you wouldn't notice a difference between 80 proof and 100 proof, but you notice a difference.
Yeah, you do.
So this is bottled in bond, and Mollie can explain that a little bit more later, but bottled in bond means it's got to be at least 50% or 100 proof. And that extra bit of evaporative function from the alcohol just carries all those flavors down your throat, up into the roof of your mouth. Really nice. I like it. I'm not, I'm a beer drinker, a wine drinker. Don't go much for spirits. And making a cocktail around my house, if you come to my house and you expect me to make a cocktail, you just showed up at the wrong place. But I did make this highball, and well, let me tell you that I like the rye, and I love ginger ale, and the two together are even better. So very tasty.
I think you really notice the proof of our rye and our bourbon. We don't actually bottle anything that's lower than 100 proof, and I feel like you really notice the proof in a cocktail. Because if you're making a cocktail with an 80 proof whiskey, you're not going to taste the alcohol after mixing with other things. But I feel like at 100 proof, you really do get some of that sharpness through, which we're really proud of.
Yeah, so I do get the aromatic of obviously the flavors from the rye, but the aromatics from the alcohol is certainly, and I mix this pretty much straight up by recommendation, a shot and just, about 4 ounces of ginger ale. And boy, it really, really just a nice balance. And I like the way it, well, what can I say? I'm not really a cocktail drinker, but I'm digging this. So
cool. That's the best.
And it might be a new favorite for the backyard on a sunny, warm day here in Albuquerque.
Yeah, and the aromatics on this straight bourbon are fantastic too. I mean, it's this is 4 years old, I believe, at least 4 years. Everything you release is at least 4 years old. This is fall of 2014 was when this one was made. And it's still, I mean, you can almost smell the char on the barrels in the bourbon. So it almost is like you're getting this raw, just bourbon coming at you. It's just got a very raw feeling to it that I really enjoy. And John, you're nailing, that 100 proof does make a big difference. You really feel it going down. But I love smelling it. It's got a little bit, you were mentioning that caramel notes. There's some of that vanilla note to it. But man, for as much kick as it got, it still is, it's very smooth. I mean, it's there, but it's a smooth drinking bourbon that I'm really enjoying.
I just noticed that, we had a really nice winemaker on our last episode, and the three of us just spent so much time with our noses in our glass. It was crazy. So you're just going to have to put up with whoever's not asking the question just to watch two other guys with their nose in the glass all show.
We've gotten through the bourbon, which, I think people are used to, but let's hear about a bourbon barrel aged gin.
I am, I don't know if any of us on the show are like big time cocktail and spirit folks, but in general, it's just always been kind of a tradition in my family. Like, we love gin martinis around these parts. And so, I love a good craft gin. And the reality is I often, spend a lot of time with that good craft gin, kind of lacing it with some dry vermouth. And I really did decide that I wanted to get deep into the botanical nature of this Kentucky wild gin that is bourbon barrel aged. And I have to say off the bat, I mean, you want to talk about aromatics, like this is so beautiful and zippy and balanced. And, after taking just like my first sip, there's this real like tingly mouthfeel that goes along with it. And I know you're dealing with kind of like a different animal here, but on some level, it almost reminded me of those of you that like to sip on absinthe sometimes. There's that little like tingly nature that you might get. And I'm getting that on this as well. What's really nice, though, is along with that zippiness, like it's not going to blow you away. Like, this is not something where you take a sip and then like you cock your chin back and start freaking out. There's this really cool like licorice tone throughout, like licorice and menthol type of tone. Ooh. Like you're like if cool cigarettes tasted good, almost kind of thing. And then what's also really nice here is that the botanicals being used here are really bringing this beautiful citrusy note as well. I saw that on your website, you had mentioned, especially with a barrel-aged gin, to try it as like a Martinez, which is a Manhattan, but using it with gin instead. Yeah. I could also see it just because of that zippy kind of nature. You could make a killer like take on a margarita with this as well. But honestly, like sipping this neat, I think is really fun. And I don't think a lot of gin drinkers do practice sipping their gin neat, at least really to explore the flavors behind it. This is beautiful.
That's so fun that you said that. May I jump in?
Absolutely.
Please.
It's so fun that you said that, because at trade shows and events that I do, often you are required to taste your spirits neat. And I'm always hesitant with gin because a lot of people don't like drinking gin straight, like you're saying. But the best compliments I've gotten from people are things like, I'm not a gin drinker, but I like your gin, or I can never drink gin straight. Oh, but I can drink this straight, So I'm responding to what you're picking up on. And you have a great palate because licorice is actually one of the botanicals that we use in the gin.
Oh, wow.
And not even one of the main botanicals. We use local botanicals as much as we can. We use locally grown juniper. To be gin, you predominantly have to use juniper in your botanicals. We use our state flower here in Kentucky called goldenrod.
Mm-hmm.
We use coriander, which is also sourced from a farmer's market locally. And then some of the way second and third botanicals that are added are things like licorice root and angelica root, Persian lime, and those fun things. So,
wow.
Cool. Yeah. And, it's interesting. It's only barrel aged for 7 months, but that 7 months really makes its presence known on the gin. I feel like it really rounds the flavors and adds some of those caramel tones, some of those vanilla tones. It's a neat gin.
And I know we're not in the interview portion yet, but I just have to ask, where did the idea of this gin come from, of barrel aging a gin in your bourbon barrels?
In all honesty, our producer of our gin is Jay Arisman. He is our co-founder here at New Riff. And he, he always claims his father was a gin drinker. And, if he was going to be in the spirits world, one day he wanted to make a gin sort of in honor of his dad. So he sourced a lot of local botanicals and came up with this killer gin. We're not talking about it today on the show, but we call it our Kentucky Wild Gin.
Mm-hmm.
It's very bright and very aromatic. And, we are a whiskey distillery first. We make that very clear. We like gin. We make gin because we like drinking it. But our bourbon and our whiskeys are our priority and our focus. So to tie them in together, we make barrel aged gin. So we are a whiskey distillery that makes gin. And of course, we have to experiment and put it in some barrels. And we tasted it at 3 months, 5 months, 12 months. And we really felt like 7 months was the sweet spot for this particular product.
Awesome.
That's beautiful. And I was a little bit afraid whenever I think about, I haven't had many barrel aged gins, but my big fear is what happens when we have a barrel that just overpowers the delicate botanical nature of the gin. But this is it's just a kiss. Like, honestly, if you had told me it was a couple of days, I would have believed you because I wouldn't know the difference. But this is wonderful, and I think it would be fun. Anybody that could set that up is to taste like the Kentucky Wild Gin next to the bourbon barrel aged. I think that'd be a fun exploration.
They're very, very, very different. I mean, there's the intertwining. I mean, the botanicals are the same. The neat thing about our gin too is that it's topped with 10% of our unaged rye. So there's a neat spice in the product, I think, that responds really well to the barrel. But you guys are wine guys, and I come from a wine background. I mean, one of the challenges with our barrel aged gin is that depends on the time of the year to hit that sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
In the warmer months, it really develops in the barrel nicely, but in the cold months, when the barrel's in the rick house, it's cold and the barrel, the gin is not expanding and contracting in the way that you want it to with the barrel. So we've played around with trying to keep it longer or mixing the two seasons. And it's a living product. You always have challenges, but we're very happy with what we have come out with. And in fact, I do need to brag, it won best of category at the San Francisco International Spirits Competition this year.
Oh, nice. Congratulations.
Not only did it get a double gold, but it was best of category, which is kind of cool.
That's awesome.
I don't know how many barrel aged gins there were, but you can take it.
That's awesome. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I wanted to make one last tasting note. I mean, being a beer guy and expanding my wine palate, I never thought of rye as being a sipping whiskey. I guess I was wrong. These guys know how much I love Russian Imperial Stouts because it's for a beer, it's boozy, but it leaves that stickiness on your lips when you're sipping it. And I love the fact that this rye did the same thing. It was just like, oh man, that's what I'm looking for.
That's really neat. Yeah. I mean, total disclosure, rye is what I drink at home when I'm enjoying. Nico, honey, please go upstairs. I'm sorry.
This is the family episode. It's all good.
That's all right. You good? You good?
I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Jeff has an editing button.
Yeah. My kids will probably be here in the next 10 minutes. So,
That's awesome.
this is why we normally record after they go to bed, right, Jeff? So, all good. All good, Molly, for real.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
All right. All right. Great tastings, guys. Molly, thank you so much for these bottles. You guys make some hellish, awesome products. But we're going to move on with the show now. So let's warm up our brains with a little bit we like to call
Wine, beer, or pop culture reference. This is where I am going to give our squad a wonderful term, and they're going to have to tell us, is this a wine term, a beer term, or some sort of pop culture reference? The term this week is Orris. Is Orris a wine term, a beer term, or a pop culture reference? I'd like to start with John Bruyak.
Oh, I thought we were going to hit Eccles the third time in a row, but how could we do that since he does this once every 3 weeks? Mr. Jeff Solomon, would you do us all the favor of spelling Orris for us?
Orris. O-R-R-I-S. Orris.
Orris. Thought there was one less R in that because I could just swear that I've seen that term before. Orris.
or is it?
Or is oh my goodness. I think that this Orris I should just go off a tangent because Solomon does this all the time in this section. There's got to be a Dr. Seuss. There's got to be a Dr. Seuss book with an Orris in it, right? I think Orris is a wine term, and I can't tell you exactly what it is at all.
John Ruyak says that Orris is a wine term. Jeff Eccles. What's Orris?
Orris. Not something to do with a walrus. Orris. This doesn't sound like a beer term. This doesn't sound like a wine term. So I guess I'm going to have to punt and say that this is a pop culture reference. I can't even think of what it may be. Maybe it has something to do. What's in Jeff's room? Maybe it has something to. I can't even think of anything. I'm not even. Apparently I only think after 8 o'clock at night. I can't get anything going right now. But I'm going to say it's a pop culture reference.
Jeff Eccles is abstaining from the vote. He basically just said present is what he just did. So, Mollie Lewis of New Riff Distilling, Orris?
I know Orris to be a root. So Orris root is a botanical that I would probably, so I've had two people time to prepare my response, but I would say it's not anything that you would find in a wine or a beer per se, but perhaps you would use it as a tasting reference of a flavor that you might pick up in tasting notes of a wine or beer.
Interesting.
Can I change my answer?
Yeah, what is it?
Orris is a pop culture reference because I think there's a bunch of baby products made by a company called Orris.
We have to get the squirrel, Orris. Orris, I am actually making reference to Orris root, which is one of 12 botanicals found in the Kentucky Wild Gin from New Riff Distilling. It really depends. What's the base spirit for the gin? I think that'll swing it.
In all honesty, our base spirit is a grain neutral spirit. So
Grain
neutral.
neutral. So
Yes.
So I think we're gonna have to say it's a beer term then, because it's a fermented grain that it started with. So yeah,
Orris root is a botanical used
I
in our
know.
distillation process, but I mean, you wouldn't use it in wine or beer, right? So maybe perhaps if you knew what
No.
it tasted like, you might call it a tasting note.
We'll call it a pop culture reference, because I think after this episode, New Riff is blowing up like the latest E40 single.
Oh God.
Pop culture.
I should have known when you went with our guest last that it had to do something with their product. All right, excellent job, everybody. Everybody wins. So let's do this. We've been talking to Mollie for almost a half hour now. I guess it's time we could interview her. You know what she came here for. So Mollie, I think right off the bat, let's keep it simple. New Riff Distilling. You are a new riff on an old tradition is kind of your tagline. So can you tell us what is the new riff on an old tradition?
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite things to talk about. You know, we at New Riff really pride ourselves on transparency. That's something that's very important to us, and dare I say, separates us from other brands in the market. You know, we don't pretend like we have grandpa's recipe under the bed. That's very, very important that folks know that we are new. We opened our doors in 2014. We all had different careers before we got into this business. Ken, our founder, my father, was a retailer for 40 years, and he had access to all the best products that were coming out of Kentucky. We're in Kentucky, but all over the world, you know, the things that made it to Kentucky. And he really, really fell in love with whiskey, fell in love with bourbon. He saw the tradition of bourbon as a really iconic thing for our state. And by no means would we ever try to, you know, replicate things that we've tasted. We honor the traditions of the past, but we're just putting our spin on them, or our new riff on them. So we kind of narrowed our tagline down to really just showing our reverence for the founders and brothers and sisters before us in the industry. We're just putting our own little take on that.
New Riff Distillery. We're younger than vape juice.
Oh God.
Oh God.
No.
That's terrible, Jeff Solomon. That's awesome. And I kind of, if you don't mind, I kind of love the story of how your father came into starting the distillery. Can you talk a little bit about the plan and how you went from Party Source Liquor to New Riff?
Yeah, absolutely. The Party Source to date is still, to our knowledge, one of, if not the largest independent, which is important, retail store in the country for alcoholic beverages. So, you know, he saw an opportunity to place a giant, almost Costco-sized store on state lines. So we are really, really one of the most, if not the most northern point in Kentucky right before you go into Ohio. And strategically that helped because Ohio has always been a control state. So prices are set, there's no discounting, and folks would travel from hours into Ohio to come shop at the Party Source, and it became an overnight success. And, you know, he loved retailing. He was really good at it. He was certainly the best in the state and, you know, won awards all over the country for his prowess as a retailer. But he fell in love with bourbon. I mean, we're a Kentucky family. He was born in Louisville. I was born in Louisville. You know, we're Kentucky as the day is long. And we really respect this amazing artisanal spirit coming out of our home state. And he had access to all kinds of good stuff before it blew up. I mean, we have stories of getting barrels of Pappy and choosing which one we wanted to bottle for the store.
Wow.
You know, our laugh now is we should have chosen them all, of course, but you know, we knew how things were going back then. And so he saw the boom happening. He's a very smart businessman. His business was debt-free. You know, it was a real family business. He takes care and took care of his employees. But dare I say, he likes living on the edge a little bit more. You know, I mean, were he to be 90% of the population, he probably should have retired in Tahiti or something, you know, with this debt-free, successful business. But he loved bourbon and he wanted another challenge. He wanted a second go at it. And in 2010, he and Jay Arisman, who is our co-founder, but was also the fine spirits buyer at the store and had been for over a decade, dreamed up the idea of building our own distillery. So, you know, Jay specifically had all of these contacts with all of the main heritage distilleries in the state. And, you know, they were fans of the Party Source. We all kind of took care of each other. And so it was a natural evolution when they actually decided to do this. We put everything into it. And I'm also really proud of the fact that what Ken did in 2014 was he sold the store to the employees. And I like to mention that because it's becoming more well known across America, but an ESOP, and you know, where literally you walk into the store at this point and the cashiers all the way up to management are owners of the store. You know, he wanted to make sure his employees were taken care of. You know, they were a second family to him. He treated them with familial respect. And so he wanted to do this, but he wanted to know everybody would be taken care of. So it's a neat story. And what it did financially was enable him, without investors, to build the distillery from the ground up. So he did it. He's a really amazing guy. I'm lucky to know him and work for him, and you know, most of the time be his daughter.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about my dad. I think he needs to step it up a little bit. What's up, Marcello?
John Riak.
So you mentioned I don't have the bourbon. I've got the rye, but you mentioned that you talked about your corn growers. So you have someone that you buy your corn exclusively from for the bourbon?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, again, we are completely transparent. If you ever come to our distillery, our column still is encased in glass, and it's sort of an analogy for how we mean business. You'll see on our bottles, the mash bills are always on the back of the bottle. That's important to us. So yeah, our corn grower is a wonderful family farmer. Their names are Charles Fogg is the name of the farmer. And actually the contact was given to us by Four Roses. So because we've been in the industry in Kentucky, Jay was very friendly with the folks at Four Roses. And they referred us to their corn source, and they supply us now and Four Roses with corn. And it's a real extra step in the level of cleanliness that they bring to us. They wash the corn before they bring it. It's completely non-GMO. It's just an amazing quality product. We're so proud of our farmer. And thanks to Four Roses for the tip.
Wow.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
You know we're all fans of Four Roses here, so that you just
How can you not be a Four Roses?
we're sold. Interview over. Send out the little like shopping carts. We're buying.
You know, to that extent, we are big Four Roses fans too. I mean, you know, we're at a point in Kentucky production where we all do really support each other. I hope that'll always be that way, where we really promote Kentucky when we go out into the world, not just our own brand. But Four Roses to us is really one of the greats. We love their high rye mash bill. Our rye mash bill is 30%. Their highest mash bill is 35%. So we really emulated what they're doing, and we just can't speak enough praises to everything they put out for the most part.
Are your rye suppliers the similar? You have a nice proprietary agreement with the people who grow your rye?
You know, great question. Yeah, our rye, so we pride ourselves on being local. And the only thing that trumps local is quality. And we really feel that the best rye comes from Northern Europe. We just feel it. I mean, we've experimented with some local rye. Actually, our Balboa rye that I showed off earlier in the program, that I hope doesn't piss people off, because you will get some. This is a local rye. This was grown by Charles Fogg. It actually was a cover crop that he was growing. And Jay said, "Wait a second, you're growing this rye and it looks and tastes really good. Let's play with it." But traditionally, we direct import our rye at this point. It's all from Germany. And we just feel like the quality is so much better.
We have to follow up then, because this was a hot topic last week. Are we concerned about possible tariffs going into effect when it comes to our rye?
You know, as a wine person, don't get me started on that subject. I hope not. You know, I really hope not. You know, we will continue focusing on the best quality. We won't sacrifice our quality. So let's just cross our fingers and hope not.
There we go.
About all we can do at this point.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, you know, we've talked a little bit about your wine background. You spent some time on the West Coast. You spent some time in Italy as an export importer. So I'm really curious, since you've lived in both worlds, what differences or similarities have stood out to you moving between the wine and bourbon industries?
That's a neat question. You know, I was scared. I mean, scared's probably not the right word, because it was such a privilege to have this opportunity. But I love wine. You know, I got into the wine business. My father, who was a retailer back then, said, "You drink enough of it. Why don't you go learn something about it? Go out to California." And, you know, because I studied art and the arts growing up. But the customer is different, I will say. Although I do feel that it is changing and starting to commingle in a way, even within the past couple of years. The customer is becoming more of the same person, but the customer that I sold to primarily before moving into the bourbon business was, you know, was a different sort. So I, as a salesperson, need to learn to chameleonize myself and know how to talk about one thing with one person, one thing with another person. But I don't miss the wine industry. I love drinking wine. I still drink wine. My husband is actually the wine director at the Party Source, so I'm lucky to still have access to a lot of awesome stuff to drink. But I really am enthusiastic about bourbon being America's #1 curated spirit. And so it's a really neat thing. You know, when I lived in Italy, I learned about, and I followed a guy to Italy, by the way. There's not a whole lot of glamour there. I followed him there. It ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, although the guy and I are not together anymore. But it really directed my life, and was neat. But I really started learning about seasonality. You know, growing up in America, you guys on the West Coast are probably a little more aware, but growing up in Kentucky, you know, things like peppers and things like, I don't know, any vegetable you just get any time of the year. Strawberries, you just go to the grocery and it probably tastes like crap, and you know, it was always available. And so living in Italy, I remember with my broken Italian, you know, talking to a grandma at the farmer's market, which was just the market. They didn't even call it the farmer's market, right? And asking for peppers. And she looked at me like I was crazy. She said, "It's not the season for peppers. Like, what's wrong with you?" And so that started my formative education in things like seasonality. So coming back to Kentucky was cool because I've made a whole 180. You know, I couldn't wait to get out when I was 18. I hated Kentucky. I was so embarrassed to be from there. And now I'm back and we have this native spirit that we're kind of spearheading. You know, even though it doesn't have to be made in Kentucky bourbon, I don't dissuade people who think that because it's neat. So, you know, in our little corner of the world, we're part of this like very unique product that comes from right here.
Awesome. Jeff?
I swear to you, I had this amazing question that I was about to throw out, and it went, oh, here it is. I see that when it comes to your bourbon, it's all bottled in bond, but that you are very proud as a company that we also go beyond that, that it's bottled without chill filtration. Could you explain to us, first of all, what is chilled filtration in a way that even I could understand it?
Absolutely.
And then also how does that lend itself to a superior product or even just a different product?
Yeah, well, so a couple things. We won't, none of our whiskeys will be released under 100 proof. So to be called bottled in bond, it has to be 100 proof. It can't be 99 proof, but it also can't be 101 proof. It can't be higher than 100. It has to be exactly that proof. And we've made a commitment that everything we release will at least be 100 proof, if not barrel strength. And all of our single barrel bottlings are always barrel strength. Our gins are 94 proof, so they're high proof without being 100 proof. We just think they taste better in cocktails that way. But speaking just about the whiskeys, we don't chill filter anything at the distillery. We've made a commitment to not even have the capability to chill filter. If we were to choose to at some point down the road, we can't. Chill filtering, what happens is a lot of the larger distilleries do it, and they do it for whiskeys as well as clear goods. And what happens is, you guys are wine people. There are, tartaric acids or or little particles of things that get left in the liquid that you don't really see. But often when you have a high proof spirit, if you add a little bit of water to it, it will cloud because the water has some sort of, chemistry effect or physical effect that it will cloud the spirit.
Yep.
And it doesn't bother us who know to expect that, but it does bother, at this point, the mass public. And so that's why a lot of distilleries do chill filter, because what they do is they reduce the temperature to almost chilling. You can't chill alcohol, but you bring it down to a very, very, very cold temperature, and you filter out those solid particles. So once you've done that, you can add water and you won't have that cloudiness, which doesn't affect flavor at all. On the contrary, we feel that when that happens, when that chilling happens, you also filter out a fair amount of flavor.
Mm-hmm.
That's our take on it. A lot of craft distilleries are also adopting that same philosophy. But for New Riff's point of view, we would rather our whiskey cloud, or even our gin cloud to an extent, with a couple ice cubes or a little addition of water, and not sacrifice that flavor. Jay, who has taught me so much about whiskey, referred to it once as, two different cuts of steak. So a flank steak is very lean, right? You like flank steak, it's great, it's good, it's delicious. But a ribeye has so much flavor because it has so much fat.
Mm-hmm.
And so our non-chill filtered product is the equivalent of a ribeye steak because we leave those fatty acids in it. We think it has a fuller mouthfeel and more flavor.
I love that so much. And like going back to my whole like little absinthe connection, one of my favorite things to do with absinthe is I don't add any sugar or anything. I just need one ice cube. And I love, they call it the luge, when all those botanicals and all those, the tartaric acid just kind of like all comes out and clouds it up. I love that. And I'm so glad you explained it to us that way. I also feel like, gosh, the big guys are chill filtering. That means that they also have a second line of revenue because now they're selling cream of tartar as well.
Hey.
And I think the other thing that is just coming across a ton talking to you and tasting it is just how much focus on quality that you have from nuts to bolts, from the beginning of the process to the end of the process. You can tell and you can taste that quality just drips from what you guys are doing. So I definitely appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that. if there's anything about New Riff that we hope people will take away from our product is, and it comes down to the attention we've paid to the packaging. I mean, first and foremost, to the quality of the whiskey in the bottle. There's no question. But, all aspects of it, the packaging, waiting 4 years before we even released it. We didn't make a vodka to sell in the interim because we don't like vodka. We like things with flavor, so we don't cut corners from when it comes to our grains down to everything about it. We still price it, we think, quite fairly, and if there's anything we want people to think about New Riff is that these guys are trying to do it right. We're not trying to fake anybody out or come out with some story about what we're doing. It's just honest, whiskey with integrity that we all feel really proud of. Thank you.
That's awesome. Jeff or John, any other questions for Mollie?
As a brewer, and we have a small outfit, 3 barrels, and I brew 3 times a week. So that's 600 pounds of barley after it's been mashed. What does a distillery do with the several tons of wet used grain at the end of a mash?
Awesome question. And if our head distiller ever listens to this podcast, which I'm sure he will because it's such a great one, I think he'll laugh at my response. But stillage, and Kentucky we call it backset, and so it has a lot to do with what we do at our distillery, probably more than anyone working with us ever dared to imagine. But first of all, New Riff, we really pride ourselves on the sour mash regimen, we call it. And sour mashing is kind of a staple in Kentucky. Most distilleries do sour mash. What that means is we take about 25% of the stillage, that solid material, those spent grains, from the batch before, and we put it into the new batch. And we do that for a number of reasons. We really feel that there's a consistency of flavor that we're getting, and we just feel that it makes a superior product. But even though we're using 25%, there's still 75% of that stillage that we got to do something with, right? We got to get rid of it. And one of the issues that we've had at New Riff, because we're located in Newport, Kentucky, we're very urban. I mean, not urban compared to you guys in your big cities, but for Kentucky, we're urban because we're right on the border of Cincinnati. So we're not, that distillery with rolling hills in the background. We don't have farmers all around us. In fact, the closest farm is about 20 miles away. And that was something we did not think about when we built our distillery. So we've got to get rid of this stillage. You can't just pour it down the drain, right?
Right.
So we were offering it to farmers for their cattle. It's wonderful cattle feed. It's very organic and nutritious, and there's no alcohol left in it. And but sometimes they'd show up, and sometimes they wouldn't. And it became we would just build up. I mean, we do 3 runs a day, so that stuff piled up.
Wow.
It doesn't smell all that great after it's been sitting there either.
Not the day of, right? Otherwise, it's a real mess. So, I mean, so we literally are at a point right now where we pay our farmers fuel and we literally pay them to come pick it up. So it's a huge problem for us. When you're out in the countryside, when you're Heaven Hill or Maker's Mark, or, when you're in the countryside, like most other Kentucky distilleries, there's farms right around the corner, that you gladly give your stillage to. Anyway, that's not the case for us. So we're making do, but it is kind of a thorn in our side, if you will.
You could make a boatload of dog biscuits.
You know how many dog biscuits you'd have to make? We actually do have a company that does take some. They maybe take a gallon. So,
right.
Our fermenters are 5,800 gallons each.
Wow.
3 a day, 4 days a week. So that's a lot. Damn lot.
Wow.
A lot of dog biscuits.
Yeah.
Ruyak, I'm envisioning Marley and PETA in the corner, like salivating right now when they listen to that podcast.
When I tell them that we're putting peanut butter in it, their dog biscuits, they'll be beating down the door here any second.
I know we're going long on the interview, but I did also want to ask on the new Riff is your logo. I mean, it almost looks like a sound wave or something like that with a line running through it at the 0 axis. So what is that logo and what is its meaning to new Riff?
In a very light way, we're a new Riff. Riff translates in a number of different ways. Like we like to use it more as a new riff on an old tradition. We say often that we're a new riff on Ken's life, or in second career, new riff. And we like the term riff because it also refers to music and refers to guitar, right? Or guitar riff. So we sort of simulated that with the loose logo of being like a sound wave.
Okay.
In full disclosure, Ken is a closet hippie, not even that closet. He was in college in the early 70s, late 60s. And I grew up going to Dead shows until I was an early teenager when poor Jerry passed away. That was big trauma to our family. But he loves music, always has. We always have music playing in the distillery. And so it's a loose reference to music. We're not a musical brand, but we can get away with it a little bit in our logo.
Awesome.
Nice.
All right.
I don't know if you know this. I used to work at a record store.
That was coming.
All right. If you guys got one last question, let's do them up. Jeff.
If you could pair any new Riff Distillery spirit with any Grateful Dead song, what would it be?
Oh gosh, I love it. I promised my father that I would play Truckin' at my wedding and walk down the aisle to it, which I did with him. Gosh, geez, that's a tough question. Wow. Well, one of my all-time favorites is Road Jimmy. That's a super mellow song. That's a long song. I hope those listening maybe know the song. I'm not going to sing it. But having a nice big pour of New Riff bourbon, whether it's bourbon, single barrel bourbon, or rye, or single barrel rye, and a couple ice cubes. I like it on ice. I'm not a neat drinker. I savor it. And listening to that song, I'm pretty blitzed out. That's a nice afternoon for me.
Excellent. John?
You know what? How do I follow that up? I don't have a better question.
All right.
I will say I'm glad you didn't say
That's
Ripple.
right, John. In your face.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't say Ripple.
All right. Mollie, thank you so much for taking part in the interview portion of the show. Like we said before the show, we don't ask a whole lot of hard-hitting questions of the show. We just like to get to know the person and get to know the product. And you did a great job talking to us about New Riff, and it made me love it even more than I did from tasting it. So thank you so much for joining us for that.
Thank you for taking the time, all of you.
Absolutely.
And thank you for appreciating our product. We're proud of it too.
Excellent. So I'm going to take a quick time out, guys. We're at about 50 minutes now. John, the booze story, it won't take long, I think. So I think we can probably fit it in. So let's go ahead and add that. Mollie, do you have another 15 minutes in you?
I sure do. I'm also happy to go and start dinner for my children. I have 3 boys.
Oh my goodness.
I know. It's crazy.
3, 2. There's 11 boys on this podcast, 11 sons.
Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, so many butts and balls in this house. You have no idea. So I'm happy to stick around. However, I'm happy to go make chicken. whatever is comfortable.
Okay, we'll push through it quick then.
Okay.
All right, we'll bring us back in. Excellent. All right, let's move on with the show and get into some hard hitting booze news. We're discussing interesting, noteworthy, or sometimes some pretty silly things. I don't know where this one falls into to this week, John, but take it away.
Well, Dateline, somewhere in Kentucky, we all know there was that horror story that happened with Jim Beam, and they got hit by lightning. And they lost 40,000 barrels of bourbon to that act of God. So I don't know, maybe because they chill filter their products. Who knows? No judgment here, but to add insult to injury, by no fault of their own, by a lightning strike hitting a corner of their rack house, a lot of that bourbon ended up in a creek and then ended up in the Kentucky River, then ended up in the Ohio River, and the Kentucky Department of Environment saw fit to fine them $600,000. So I don't know. What do you think about that? Mollie, is it fair that an act of God costs a company $600,000 and over and above the fact that 40,000 barrels probably lost them $6, $7, $8 million in products?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Number one, 40,000 barrels is not that much for Jim Beam, just FYI.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Number two, I grew up water skiing on the Ohio River and always told to keep my mouth closed or I would get some terrible disease. So I think we should be thanking Jim Beam in a roundabout sort of way because I bet the water tastes better.
Yeah,
No,
you made it safe to drink now.
Right. I mean, think about all that alcohol. It's got to kill all those parasites and things that, were going to give us terrible diseases growing up. It's probably a much cleaner river. No, in all honesty, I think that's a terrible fine. Obviously, it wasn't their fault. It was a natural disaster. That's something that you can never predict or prevent. And, however much that is to them, it seems unnecessary.
Yeah, I really agree. Like this just seems, there's one thing when negligence is involved, but unless they didn't have a lightning rod in some place or something like that, but I can't imagine that that's a regulation anywhere. But this is, it's something terrible that happens, and it's environmentally bad. For the animals, it's bad for the parasites, which is good for us. But I don't see how you would come across as thinking it's a good idea to fine them for being struck by lightning. That seems pretty ridiculous to me.
I think the fine itself, we can all agree, sounds a little bit excessive. I don't know if it's that excessive to Jim Beam themselves. I'm sure they could afford it. The thing that I wonder, and these are just questions that I'm asking, are there, when you're dealing with that volume of liquid, are there certain amounts of regulations that are put in place to handle things like accidental spillage, even if like everything opened up at the exact same time? I don't know if that's something that is actively on the books. I don't know if it's something that actively officers are going around from one distillery to the next saying, hey, this is out of compliance. But should something like this happen, that would be a real issue. There is, and we can joke about it, but there is an environmental cost to that. There's an environmental cost to manufacturing in general and doing business. And I don't even know if this is the first time something like this has happened to Jim Beam or any other, like distillery or brewery or winery. My hope is that maybe instead we kind of use this as some sort of positive. And I don't even know if there has to be like legislation on the books, but maybe some sort of like, third party that people opt into in the way that maybe, we talk about sustainable wine growing, where it's like an auditor might look at things like that and say, if you really want to meet like these criteria, these are some things that we might be thinking about. It's a shame on all parts. It's a GD shame. I saw John's hand just fly up like out of his socket. So please, you have the floor, man.
We all know that around oil refineries and big oil containers, there's that tall berm, so that there's a rupture in that tank. It contains it at least to the, so it fills up to the, but then it's level with what's left in the tank. So if you did that, we could all go swimming in bourbon if there's an accident.
Or either that, or like everybody who works on the premises has to carry a paper straw with them, paper straw. And just, hey man, you got to sacrifice, because if it makes it to the river, we are fucked.
As usual, we're providing no help to the people involved in this at all. Mr. B,
We're here to serve.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else on that, folks, or can we move on?
We can move on.
Okay.
It's a tragedy, no matter how big or how small. You're absolutely right.
Absolutely. All right. Well, if Jeff Solomon is pushing paper straws on all of us, it must be.
Last call.
Last call.
That's right. Last call. Time to clean house and lock the doors. You know what we do here, folks. We're looking for a little help from you. You can follow us on the social media platforms. We're on Twitter as We Like Drinking 1, on Instagram and Facebook at We Like Drinking. And be sure to join our private group on Facebook known as The Tavern by visiting welikedrinking.com/tavern. Molly, one last time, where are the best places for our listeners to find you on the social media channels?
Facebook is at New Riff. Twitter is at New Riff. And LinkedIn is New Riff Distilling.
Awesome. You can, John Ruyak, if the folks have some thoughts on our show, where can they go to leave us a review?
Well, use your fingers on the search bar and type in Apple Podcasts and look for us on there, and listen to us. Give us a 5-star review. And if you like this episode, share it with a friend, please.
And Jeff Solomon, if the folks have done all that, but they just want to do more, how can they help the show out?
Hey, we will take all song requests at welikedrinking.com/pledge to find out more how you could become a patron of our show through Patreon, and help keep this little engine just chugging down the tracks. You know what I'm saying?
There you go, man. You can also find this episode with all the links to the stories or mentions we had at welikedrinking.com/episodes. All right. This was a blast. I'm glad we do it in the afternoon, so I can just keep sipping on this bourbon all night long. But until we get to that time, it's the time of the show where I get to say, okay, panel, let's take one last trip around this table and get some final thoughts before we shut off the lights. John Ruyak.
Oh, man, I can see it now. I'm going to be up to my armpits in spent grain dog biscuits.
We're shipping them all to you. Jeff Solomon.
Cut the music. Driving that train, high on cocaine. New Riff, Kentucky, distilling. Bring it back.
Excellent. Molly, any final thoughts before we let you go?
You guys are great. I've had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I will certainly tune our friends and customers onto the podcast. And I wish you all the best of luck.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right back to you. Thank you for taking time out of your Sunday to join us, for introducing us to this fantastic New Riff bourbon and gin. And we just really appreciate getting to know you, and wish you nothing but the best of luck with your endeavors.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Come see us in Kentucky. It's a cool place. And I would never said that 25 years ago.
Dimitri, get your ass over there. And with that, I'll say thanks again for joining us at the We Like Drinking podcast.
Where you drink alone. We didn't tell Molly about that.
Awesome. Let me wrap up the YouTubes here real quick.
Bye, YouTube. Bye, Jeff McKinney. Hey, Vikings, you like that?